Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into Leviticus chapter 23.
Right. It's quite the chapter.
It really lays out this whole calendar of appointed feasts, sacred assemblies for the Israelites. What can we maybe learn from these instructions about how they saw time, community, purpose, all intertwined?
Well, it's definitely a fascinating section. It gives us this really specific rhythm for their year, almost like a mandated schedule, you know?
Okay, let's get into it then. It actually starts with something pretty familiar, doesn't it? Like a foundational beat before the annual stuff.
Exactly. The Sabbath. It's right there first in verse 3. It sets that basic weekly pulse. You've got 6 days for work, but the seventh day, that's a Sabbath of complete rest. A Sabbath of Sabbaths, some might say.
And it's called a day of sacred assembly. So gathering together and no work, like at all, wherever you live.
That's the command. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. It's not just personal time off. It's a required collective pause, a sacred break in the routine, putting rest and community right at the heart of the week.
Okay, so that's the weekly rhythm. Then we get into the annual cycle. It starts in the first month, according to the text. Passover is the first big one.
Right, verse 5. Passover kicks off at twilight, 14th day of that first month. That core memory, right? Liberation from Egypt.
And then immediately following that, almost connected, is the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah. Starts the very next day, the 15th, runs for 7 days straight. And verses 6 to 8 are really clear. For that whole week, you must eat bread made, well, without yeast.
Right, no 11. For 7 days. And there are specific assemblies mentioned, too.
Yes. Sacred assemblies on day 1 and day 7 of that week. No regular work allowed on those days.
Okay.
Plus, you've got daily offerings made by fire for all 7 days. It's this extended period that really hammers home the memory of that hasty departure from Egypt. They didn't have time for the bread to rise, you know?
So the food itself becomes the reminder. That makes sense. Remembering the rush through what you eat, or don't eat, rather.
Exactly. It's a physical thing, embedding that history.
So after that, as they get into the land, the agricultural year starts kicking in. What comes next?
That brings us to the Feast of First Fruits. That's verses 9 through 14. And it specifically applies after they've entered the Promised Land and, started harvesting. The instruction is to bring a sheaf of the very first grain harvested.
The first grain, like the absolute initial bit, not just some of it.
Precisely. The very first yield. You bring it to the priest.
And what happens then? He just takes it.
The priest waves this sheaf before the Lord. It's a specific ritual action.
Waving it. What's that about?
The text says it's to be accepted on your behalf. And the timing is interesting, too. It's done on the day after the Sabbath.
The day after the weekly rest day.
Yeah, so it connects the first fruits of the annual harvest right back to that foundational weekly rhythm of rest and assembly.
So the cycles are sort of woven together.
Yeah.
The start of the harvest work acknowledges the pattern of rest.
Exactly. It's integrating these different time cycles. And along with waving the sheaf, there are specific offerings mentioned: a burnt offering, grain offering, drink offering, all described as a pleasing aroma, an offering by fire.
Yeah.
And here's a key restriction. You are forbidden to eat any bread or roasted grain or even new grain from that harvest until you've made this offering.
Wow. So it's really about acknowledging the source, that the first part belongs to God before you even taste it yourself.
That's the idea. Prioritizing gratitude, recognizing where the bounty comes from before personal consumption. And like some others, this is called a lasting ordinance.
Yeah, that phrase keeps popping up, doesn't it? Lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Really underlines the intended permanence.
Okay, so this leads us to the next harvest feast, the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost.
That's the one. It's literally counted from first fruits,
Uh-huh.
verses 15 onwards. You count off 7 full weeks.
7 weeks.
7 full weeks from the day after that Sabbath when the first fruit sheaf was brought. So 50 days total, landing on the day after the 7th Sabbath. 50 days. Hence Pentecost.
Exactly. And on that 50th day, you present an offering of new grain to the Lord. But here's where it gets, well, really interesting compared to unleavened bread.
How so?
You bring 2 loaves made of fine flour, yes, but they are specifically baked with yeast.
With yeast. Hold on, we just spent a week strictly avoiding yeast. Why the switch?
It's significant, right? It likely points to the different meaning. Unleavened bread looked back the rush out of Egypt, but the Feast of Weeks, it celebrates the completed grain harvest in the land. You're offering a fully prepared food, leavened bread. Maybe it signifies being settled, the process complete, offering the finished product of the land.
Ah, okay. That contrast does highlight the different focus. Unleavened for departure, leavened for arrival, and harvest completion.
Makes sense, doesn't it? And this section also details other significant sacrifices, burnt offerings, a sin offering, fellowship offerings. It's a major observance. Plus, another sacred assembly, no regular work.
Right. But there's something else tucked in here, isn't there? Something that feels a bit different from just ritual instructions.
You noticed that, yes. The command about gleanings.
Yeah, tell us about that.
It's right there in verse 22, kind of embedded in the middle of the Feast of Weeks instructions. It explicitly says, when you're reaping your harvest,
Mm-hmm.
you are not to reap right to the very edges of your field. And don't go back to pick up what you dropped, the gleanings.
You just leave it.
Yes, leave them. Specifically, leave them for the poor and the alien. And it's immediately followed by that grounding statement, I am the Lord your God.
Wow. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of festival rules tied to the harvest and worship, there's this direct command about social justice, about caring for the vulnerable.
It really is profound. It completely reframes what these sacred assemblies were about. It wasn't just, vertical worship, God and me. It was fundamentally tied to horizontal relationships, how the community treated its most vulnerable members, especially regarding the very source of their wealth, the harvest.
So the idea that ritual and ethics are separate,
Mm.
that just doesn't hold up here.
Not at all. It integrates economic justice and compassion directly into the religious calendar, into the celebration of their livelihood.
That's a really crucial connection. Okay, so that covers the spring and early summer cycle. If we move towards the autumn, the 7th month seems pretty busy too. It starts with the Feast of Trumpets.
Correct. Verses 23 to 25. First day of the 7th month. It's marked as a day of rest, a sacred assembly, and it's commemorated with trumpet blasts.
Trumpet blasts. Like an announcement.
Seems like it. A signal, perhaps, announcing the start of this very significant month. Again, no regular work and an offering by fire.
Okay, so it sets the stage. And what follows is, well, probably the most solemn day of their entire year.
Definitely. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. 10th day of that same 7th month. Verses 26 to 32 cover this. It is the Day of Atonement when atonement is made communally and individually.
And the instructions here seem much stricter than for the other feasts.
They really are. You hold a sacred assembly, present an offering by fire, sure, but the commands that are heavily emphasized are, you must deny yourselves, and you shall do no work at all on this day.
Deny yourselves. What does that typically mean in this context? Fasting.
Yes, fasting, no food or drink is the most common understanding, but it points to a broader sense of humility, repentance, focusing inward, intense reflection. And the no work at all command is the absolute strictest prohibition in the calendar.
Why so strict? And the consequence mentioned seems incredibly severe.
The text says anyone who doesn't deny himself or who does any work on that specific day must be cut off or destroyed from their people. It's harsh.
Cut off, like exiled, or worse.
It likely meant expulsion from the covenant community, losing one's place among the people, perhaps even facing divine judgment. It just underscores the unique gravity of this day. It's a total stop, a pause for national and personal purification, reconciliation with God.
The seriousness really comes through. It's set apart. So after that incredibly solemn day, what's the final major feast in this annual cycle?
That would be the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, Sukkot. It starts just a few days later, on the 15th day of the 7th month, and runs for 7 days, verses 33 to 43.
Tabernacles, booths, like temporary shelters.
Exactly. That's the core practice. For 7 days, all native-born Israelites are commanded to live in these temporary dwellings, these booths or sukkot.
And why? What's the point of camping out for a week?
Verse 43 gives the reason explicitly. So your descendants will know that the Lord had the Israelites live in booths when I brought them out of Egypt. It's about remembering the journey.
Ah, okay. So like the unleavened bread, it's another physical action to embed historical memory, reminding them of the wilderness, period.
Precisely. Passing that collective memory down through generations via direct experience. But it's not just solemn remembrance.
No, it
Yeah.
sounds like it might be a bit more upbeat.
Absolutely. Notice the timing. It happens after the final harvest, after you've gathered the crops of the land. So it's very much a harvest festival, too.
Right, celebrating the ingathering.
And they're told to take specific things, choice fruit, palm fronds, leafy branches, poplars, and to rejoice before the Lord for 7 days. It's a command to celebrate.
So it's this unique blend, remembering the hardship of the journey while celebrating the abundance of the destination, the harvest.
Exactly. Celebration and remembrance, hand in hand. And structurally, like the others, there's a sacred assembly on day 1, offerings by fire for the 7 days, and then a closing sacred assembly on the 8th day as well.
An 8-day period in total, then, bookended by these assemblies. And again, I assume a lasting ordinance.
You got it. Lasting ordinance celebrated yearly in the 7th month.
The chapter then adds a little note at the end, doesn't it? Verses 37 and 38, just clarifying things.
Yeah, it's important context. It basically says that all these required feast offerings and assemblies we've just discussed are in addition to the regular weekly Sabbaths, and also in addition to personal gifts, vows, and free will offerings people might bring.
So these big annual events don't replace the regular weekly rhythm or individual expressions of faith and giving.
Exactly. They form a required communal baseline, a structure for the year, but they don't cover everything.
Okay. So we've walked through this incredibly detailed calendar, from the weekly Sabbath rest right through the annual cycle, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, weeks, trumpets, atonement, tabernacles. When you step back and look at the whole thing, what does this structure tell us about the values being embedded here?
Well, it's pretty comprehensive, isn't it? It builds regular rest right into the structure of time itself. It ties their spiritual observances directly to the land, the seasons, the harvest, their physical reality.
Right, it's very grounded.
And it demands not just gratitude for that bounty, but also social responsibility. Remember the gleanings. It mandates specific times for remembering their history, ensuring identity is passed on through shared experience, not just stories.
And that unique time for deep reflection and atonement.
Exactly. So you have rest, remembrance, celebration, introspection, and social care, all woven together into one annual rhythm.
It feels like a calendar that's dictating much more than just holidays. It's shaping how they lived, when to rest, remember, celebrate, reflect, even how to share the proceeds of their work.
Precisely. And that constant refrain, a lasting ordinance, suggests this wasn't just advice. It was intended as a foundational blueprint for structuring their society, integrating the sacred with the social, the historical with the agricultural, the individual with the communal.
And going back to that command about leaving gleanings for the poor and the alien, right in the Feast of Weeks, it's such a stark reminder, isn't it, that their relationship with God was seen as inseparable from how they treated each other, especially the vulnerable, and how they managed the resources God provided.
It definitely challenges any neat separation between ritual purity and ethical behavior. Here, they are presented as part of the same whole, the same system of living as God's people. It makes you think about how structuring time collectively really shapes a community's identity and priorities, doesn't it?
It really does. This calendar wasn't just about marking dates. It was, in a way, a script for living out who they were meant to be.
Connected to the land, their history, their God, and each other.
So looking back at Leviticus 23, we see this incredible tapestry, this cycle of rest, remembrance, celebration, solemn reflection, and practical social care.
Yeah, it's a system designed, it seems, to weave the sacred into the very fabric of their lives, grounded in the rhythms of the earth and their shared story.
It leading to a final thought, perhaps. What is this kind of comprehensive approach, integrating rest and work, specific rituals in the harvest, historical memory like living in booths, and forward-looking care for the poor? What does it suggest about the very idea of sacred living, as outlined in this ancient text? Something for you to reflect on, considering the rhythms and structures that shape your own life and community today.